This is going to be a big experiment. We never did it before on this conference or even other conferences where panels were separate entities. So now we have the panel of the previous speakers on this session. So you have a chance to ask all of your questions you came up with during the lunch. And I will also ask provocative questions, and probably panel members can also ask questions from each other. Yeah. So I'm sure that there is some little friendly competition between companies and complementary interest. And yeah, whenever we are not getting answers, then the question were really good. Okay, so let me give first chance to the audience. So, 1, 2, yes?
So a question about international collaboration. So you mentioned some partnerships that you're establishing. Recently, Virgin got investment from Saudi Arabia and other different countries. Nanoracks has been working in China. So could you share a little bit of your experience and in which ways also these foreign partners are benefiting from this collaboration?
I mean, it was probably a payload. We flew a DNA research payload on the ISS for the Beijing Institute of Technology. Sophisticated technical payload. It had actually flown on the Chinese space station before. But for us, the hurdle was more the policy side. And it took a long and close coordination with two branches of the government to make that happen. For us, it was, we want to see, not only democratic but worldwide use of space. And we realized that there is a growing capability in China that we can't ignore, that the rest of the world can't ignore, and know for a fact that there are joint projects between European countries and the Chinese Space Agency, and this new UN announcement of opportunity further amplifies that. And it's going to be, I think, a very good capability, and we want to make sure that there are still bottlenecks in space, and that can help eliminate some of them too.
And on the galactic side, so last year we announced that we are working with the Italian Space Agency to do a research flight for them, including a payload specialist, an Italian payload specialist. So it's going to be very cool to have that collaboration, see what kind of payloads they want to fly, work with them to actually fly an Italian researcher to do human-tended payloads on galactic. So I think it's going to require experience for both sides to do that. On the orbit side, since we do have a 747, we are looking at possible campaigns out of other countries. So again, there's the regulatory barrier, especially ITAR. But that being said, if we start the process early, especially with the country, we can work through the State Department and everything that we need to do to be able to launch those campaigns and launch payloads from a country that does not, make it easier for them to do those kind of campaigns instead of shipping everything to the U.S. Also, in terms of just launch sites, the U.S. really doesn't have a low inclination launch site. So that's another possible way of collaborating with another country to get some lower inclination launch sites for our payloads.
Just to clarify for students in the room that may not know what ITAR is, this is the International Trafficking in Arms Regulations. It's the State Department's restrictions that prevent the export of U.S. technologies to other countries. They also have the unfortunate side effect of preventing U.S. aerospace firms from hiring international students, which is a really big barrier to the kinds of technologies that we all want to develop. So figuring out how do we respect the intent of that law, which is to prevent the spread of warfighting technologies, but while still allowing for exploration and science to flourish, is an interesting one.
Yeah, and so not to bring everything back to like DC and policy, but the administration has announced that export control reform is a priority. So we have a really great opportunity right now to look at, without defeating the purpose of why those restrictions are in place, how we can open up so that more people can participate in this kind of industry.
So
Chris, apologies if my assumptions are incorrect.
Yeah.
But I believe you have a grandfathered Space Act agreement to have access to ISS. How has that benefited you as opposed to the more, say, you say, politically correct way of getting to ISS?
Part of that is just by history, we predated cases by a couple of years. It probably has made a small bit of difference here or there up to now, and the challenges will come as there are more use of the capacity of the ISS. We haven't been yet severely hurt by having to shift stuff around to look at that, and they're very specific areas. Of course, the answer to those bottlenecks, as I tried to show in my presentation, is don't focus on limiting or allocating the limited capacity, but try to figure out ways to grow the capacity. That's, our airlock is one example of that. Some of the work that some of our competitors have done too provides more and more capacity to do research on the station. And we're hoping that, and we're seeing that up mass, because we get into CRS2, maybe a little bit less of a challenge than it has been. And when Dream Chaser is flying, hopefully the down mass will be less of a constraint. Though we've only had a couple of non-consequential things have to be delayed on down mass.
So I have a balancing question. So probably for Melissa or Marco. So we know that non-conventional huge corporations are really interested in education and STEM. Yeah, but many people believe that conventional big corporations are less interested in STEM, but that might not be true. So, for example, United Space Alliance or SpaceX. Reclusive, yeah. So how is STEM and education there?
Sure. So United Launch Alliance is very, very interested in STEM. It's a large part of our workforce. It's not all of our workforce, but it is a huge portion. It's also our primary volunteer avenue. So a lot of our employees volunteer both for the company and outside the company. It's where a lot of our resources go, both people and financial. But in terms of STEM, so we are an engineering company, but we hire all disciplines. We also hire physics and math and computer science, and I suspect we're not any different from any of the other companies up here. The one plug I'll throw out there, though, is that we also need people in finance and HR and communications. Sometimes we actually have trouble hiring those types of people because people think, oh, I have to be an engineer. So coming back to your question, STEM is incredibly important. It's why our company wouldn't exist without people who are interested in STEM. Every year we do interns. So we currently have about 80 or 85 interns with the company across our 5 different sites. And for me personally, it's incredibly important to fill the pipeline, keep it filled, and make sure that people have the experience and exposure to what we all do up here so people have a choice. It doesn't mean that everyone should work for a launch vehicle company, even though I love it, but to know that it's an option, to know that it's something that you can do, that it's a career path that is open to everyone is really the most important part.
I'll pick up from there since you called me out. It's same thing on our side. The company has been started by a professor and student. Doesn't get any more STEM and educational connection than that, and has been grown. So I think there are always multiple ways to support that effort. The educational effort associated to engineering and science and technology and math. We try to cover as many of those possibilities as we can. So we donate money to realities that actually leverage on that to make their own satellites or their own research or whatever else they do in terms of the different grades. I mentioned before we do mentor directly. I mean, we take our own time and I personally mentor in now 4 different groups that are making different level of satellites. A lot of my colleagues do the same. But also we enable them to fly. So soon there's going to be a high school CubeSat that is going to be launched from Irvine, the area where our headquarters is. And we have helped them along the way. We actually found a ride for them. We make sure that they had everything they needed in order to be successful with that. And also we hire. We hire as much as we can because one thing is to give them the possibility to learn to students and young generation. The other one is to actually give them the possibility to work out of that. I said earlier on, the different context, different question, that is looking forward one of the areas that I'm more concerned about. So we try to hire as early as we can through internship or right off a graduation so that we can help them along with their career as much as we can. So a lot of different aspects that needs to be covered.
Okay, wonderful. So I see very strong dedication to STEM education from everybody. So in the question for William, yeah?
I'm William Say from Columbia University. And my question is really for the entire panel. The stated emphasis of the symposium is commercial space stations. And in a more general sense, as Erika so eloquently put it, a foundational infrastructure for reaching and working in space. So I'm curious what role do you envision for automation and autonomous systems within that infrastructure?
So can you repeat the question because the live stream might have heard it, yeah?
Okay, see if I can do this here. What role do we, everyone on the panel, do we envision with the subject of this conference, which is commercial space stations, and do we see things going autonomous, I guess, between commercial space stations? How do you, is that capture it?
I would say more generally, do you think most of the infrastructure will have to support human interaction or autonomous systems or a combination of both?
So do we think that the in-space space station infrastructure will have to support human or autonomous systems or some combination of the two? So I was trying to do my slides at like midnight last night, and I had been reading about Jeff Bezos recently said he likes the idea of the lunar economy, the lunar village, where you can just like go over to the European hut and ask them for a cup of sugar. And so I was thinking, well, how would that work if we had a bunch of commercial space stations and you needed to go get a cup of sugar? So I had like a picture of the astronaut with the backpack that he was, untethered. I think Bruce McCandless, like in the maybe late '80s, with like a bowl of sugar next to him, kind of floating between two space stations, and realizing that it makes, from my perspective, as in-space propulsion, it makes every sense to remove humans from moving the little things between those space stations or between those assets. So a combination of maybe some guided work, maybe certain things that computers aren't quite yet good at. I don't know what that is exactly, but maybe some bigger things where you can just have a human steer something, or like Tyvak did. There's some rendezvous and proximity operations, which I believe was totally autonomous. Is that fair? So a good combination from my perspective.
One of the things we've seen on our new Shepherd platform suborbitally is that there are certain kinds of things that are actually much easier in unintended capacities. You have hazardous chemicals or dangerous organisms or things that you don't want to put those hazards in proximity to humans. There are certain things that the cost actually goes way down if you put a human in the building, because autonomy is still not a turnkey solution. So to take something that's operating on your laboratory bench in your classroom or your university lab and make it fully autonomous can sometimes be just as expensive as buying a ticket for the astronaut to just put their hands on it. And there's other advantages that come with that in terms of the human ability to creatively problem solve and adapt. So I think that we'll see that there's room for both, particularly in the domain of science.
And from just the operational point of view, some of those concepts of operation we're looking at have long periods of dormancy, meaning they're not crew tended, and
this one's for you. I'll put it right here.
and periods when it should be ready for the crew when they step in, and they're not spending valuable time that could be with doing research, doing maintenance tasks. So that's all the in-space, and automation is going to make our concepts for reuse of upper stages. That's going to, we think, is sort of the tipping point between where in the past it took much too much crew time to outfit those to now we think we can do that all robotically. On the ground side, looking at some of the studies of the economics of working in space, much of your cost is on the ground with large ground crews. And so having autonomous stations that need a minimal earthbound footprint is actually going to be a big cost driver. And so if you have one station that way, great. If you can run 5 stations with a minimal ground crew, that's going to be a big economic jump ahead.
So there's Independence 5 now.
Maybe. And we expect there'll be other non-independent stations up there too. So, and I mentioned the interoperability standards that NASA is putting in place. Those do include, if I remember correctly, some robotic standards. So that could help. So you can send a ship to go get sugar from your neighbor. Very important.
So we have a question from the live stream. So Mark will just read it.
Yeah, this is a question asked on the live stream earlier today from Dean Collins. Does anyone know how expensive it is to fly the cleaner fiber to and from zero gravity?
So that you're talking about the fiber optic fiber.
Made in space program.
Oh,
Yeah.
Z-Blan.
Yeah, the Z-Blan, yeah. It's, cost there is, you could do it per kilogram for the up mass, but that's not your end-to-end cost. I don't know enough about Made in Space's costs to know that, but it's, what I'm going to say about that is there again, once you get the equipment in space and you can transport stuff back and forth easily, the cost per unit of fiber goes way down.
Yeah, I would definitely redirect it to Made in Space or some of the couple other companies who are looking at that product.
So this is also directed to the entire panel, and I was wondering, what can, like, my friends and I who are here and are STEM involved, what can we do to involve people who aren't yet involved in STEM?
Keep on doing what you're doing right now. I've been sitting next to you for the entire time, 14 and 12 years old. They've been taking notes. They've been doing real-time, sorry, I'm going to call you out, guys, but it's in a good way. They've been doing real-time research on every single individual that was speaking, on every single company that was TV in real time, so that they could get their questions ready by the time that the presenter was done. They've been taking notes. They are fantastic. I think what you should do is to keep on preaching doing what you're doing, keep on staying involved, and lead by example. I'm always a pet peeve for people that actually do things and then they bring people in once they're doing it and not just telling other people what to do. So.
And if your super skill is the science and the engineering, find some friends whose super skill is the communications. Partner together. Put it up on YouTube, put it up on social media, share as broadly as you can, because it's getting that story out there. I think that a lot of us have come in our careers to value the ability to communicate science and engineering with the public. It's not something that we're taught to do in most schools. So the more that you can bring those things together, the better.
Yeah, just to really emphasize that, yes. Like, that's really important. I mean, talk about what you do, talk about it with your friends, share with other people, social media or through your school or through other clubs that you're involved with.
And tell your congressional representatives.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I know I'm not on the panel, but I'm with students for the exploration development space, and there are a lot of upcoming competitions and stuff that high schools might be able to get involved in, or even as young as middle schools, we do a lot of outreach. There's a lot of materials that you guys can get access to, and competitions that are geared towards art rather than just geared towards traditional STEM stuff. So the best way to get other students involved is just to talk to them.
Go Sets.
And we will have an education section tomorrow. Yeah, so please get lots of education questions. So there is 1, 2, 3, okay?
I just wanted to say that So we're with the New York State Department of Education, and from the central office, we started a program 2 years ago where we're actually working with parents, and we're training parents in robotics. I mentioned robotics before, and they actually go into the classrooms with the teachers during the school day, and they implement curriculum that we've developed with funding from a ton of partners, and it's just growing exponentially. And we start in elementary school because, you know, sometimes you think STEM, oh, that's high school. But the younger that you get children, the better off, because then they can start to envision themselves, and they use those great creative imaginations to think about all kinds of solutions. And they're not afraid, who said failure before? They're not afraid to try things and screw things up and break things. And I don't call it fail, it's call it, you know, creative play, and seeing where that can go. And it's just, I love working with children. It's just amazing what they come up with. And, you know, like I said, you know, I encourage you, you know, democracy. Democracy is diversity, too. And in New York City, we have such diverse populations, and sometimes those populations are overlooked for the potential and the ideas that they can add to this kind of conversation, or, you know, they could be the fuel to space. So, you know, take it back to your companies. Start young, think of everybody, you know, everybody's potential to be able to add to what you're doing, and don't forget parents, because they're the ones who encourage the children to follow these kinds of paths.
I have a question for Marka. What's it like to work with Elon?
I think I'm going to answer the question. I heard there's a live stream. I tell you this. I always say, I get the question often. I tell you this. Being able to be, and especially in the early days when I was involved, being able to be exposed to such a mind, I think it's a luxury that I will always cherish as an experience that very few people had in their life. So doesn't matter what people may think of the individual. You know, everybody's got their personal opinion about every single other individual in the world. It doesn't matter to me personally. It changed my career and changed my way of thinking and enabled everything else that I'm doing right now. Not the company, the mentality, being exposed to that. So I'm going to limit to speak about that because I think it's the most important aspect of it.
Columbia students like SpaceX. My colleagues from Leiden like SpaceX.
I'm wondering if any of you could speak to how you see the development of private space science affecting public opinion towards public funding of space science development, or whether it's kind of making that irrelevant in the long term. You know, I don't want to offend NASA people that are working because I love NASA, but you know, I'm wondering how you see that dynamic changing. And, you know, when you talk about people like Elon and when you sit at home and watch, you know, SpaceX launches and landings and things like that, and you know, that's where maybe some of the public excitement lies. You know, maybe in the next decade, let's say. How do you see that in the
I think there's always going to be a role for public research. For all of us, you know, we have private platforms that can be utilized by private companies doing research and governments doing research. Private companies that are going to be doing research, or private individuals that are going to be doing research, you know, obviously need a business case or something that they're going to be developing, hopefully to get a return on some of that research. But I think there's a lot of areas that public funding will still be very useful in, and those are those creative ideas that may not initially show, you know, a commercial product in the end, but could, you know, end up funding a ton of other ideas that end up becoming commercial and, you know, end up becoming private entities. So I think there's always going to be a role for government, whether it's in research, exploration, to look at that very initial step that maybe just be too risky for private companies and private individuals to take. So I think it's going to be a partnership and it's going to be a collaboration moving forward.
We often see in the history of many different fields of economic endeavors and exploration that the government has been the sort of trailblazer and then gotten out of the way. And the government's paid the interstate highways, but they didn't build build all the businesses that sprung up around them. They laid the first transcontinental railways and then moved out for entrepreneurs to take the lead. And I think that will continue to see that in space, is that there's more paths to blaze that are a great place for the national space agencies. And there's basic research that will continue to fill in the gaps that allow for the next things to flourish.
And if you look at the model that's being put together for Deep Space Gateway, a space station really that will circle the moon and the Earth, it's a public-private partnership. And it is trying to say, okay, as we do this next level of exploration, we may, at some point in the foreseeable future, let the private sector take care of low Earth orbit, but we're going to have a public-private partnership, let the private group use its capabilities where it's sort of repeatable, consistent to help the Deep Space Gateway, and then have both NASA and international partners develop some of the more specific capabilities on that gateway that don't make sense for the private sector to develop yet.
So I have one question, which is a little bit, let's say, rarely covered. So significant fraction of human population is living with disabilities. Yeah, some we see, some we don't. And one of the company's leaders, Richard Branson, is very open about his disability of dyslexia. So do you see the right place to get involved for people living with disabilities in the space industry? What is your opinion? How can we make sure that it happens?
So I'm a member of it's the Aerospace and Defense Forum. It's a Southern California aerospace industry group. And one of the founders of that forum is also the founder of I forget the name of the company, but they basically hire people with disabilities, kind of limited intellectual capability, to assist with very specific tasks for highly technical things that are somewhere maybe too advanced for robots, but not something that you're necessarily going to find someone who's gone through their PhD to get to. You're going to have some people in between, and so he's suggested that, at least in our case, and I think for a lot of us here, we're starting to do things by the dozens, and then by the hundreds, and by the thousands, hopefully. So as mass production comes into place, there's some areas where folks like that, at least in that spectrum of the disabilities spectrum, might have some interesting kind of stimulating work, constructing and building some of these things that are either going to be going to space or moving around in space. That's all I got.
So we're talking a lot about, sort of, I would say, near space. We're talking about space stations, we're talking about satellites in orbit. Are we still as far away from space colonies as 20 years ago? Many of your companies, the founders, want that ultimately. Where do we stand?
It depends. Gosh, it's such a big question, but it depends on which point of view you look at. Is there a station or a colony being built in the next few years that we can put a time on it and a finger? I don't think so, personally. But has there been an enormous amount of progress to build the building blocks and the enabling technology, skills, knowledge, and so on that could lead to that? The answer is absolutely yes. So it's hard to say. Personally, I struggle with those questions all the time. That's why I always anchor everything to operational usefulness, right? I said it earlier on, is because you have to always look at what you can do in the next few months, that you can tangibly do in the next few months to contribute. But at the same time, you cannot lose sight of where you're trying to go and be there in that longer time frame. And so that progress in those early stages or middle stages are very hard to measure, really is, and it's so depressing sometimes, really, because you cannot, but I think we're closer. How much closer, I don't know, but there is definitely effort being done.
And I don't think that there are that many technical hurdles that are still to be crossed to do that. Almost all the hurdles are economic, political, and cultural. So there's some interesting organizations that are starting to tackle these things within the academic sphere, the MIT Media Lab, Arizona State University, and there's some others that are starting to ask those bigger questions of how do you actually enable this, and also how do we move away from the language of colonies and colonialization to something that's a bit more inclusive and encompassing.
Also observing your former boss, I see that he tries to look for Earth analogs of what he needs to do for a colony, for automation of mobile vehicles, Tesla, for designing and executing underground habitats, the Boring Company. And I'm waiting for him to buy a agricultural company. What's that? Well, if you're going to need to grow food.
Brother's already doing that.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a family business.
Okay, so lots of questions. So, okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah.
At lunch today, I had the opportunity to talk to half a dozen very intelligent young ladies. So I asked them what they were majoring in, and the one that interested me most was the one who said design. Now, based on some of the slides I saw, there is impact of what used to be called the soft sciences. Some of those items are rounded, they're in positive colors, the logos are done to be in a very positive, warm way. So is there not a role then for design? Because if you're talking about these entities, long durations, you've got to deal with us. And humans like certain things. You know it's going to make an attractive environment for them. So how are your companies handling that in their projections going forward?
In our some of our activities with NASA, looking at deep space gateways.
Oh, and can you improve the spacesuits? What we saw, they look uncomfortable.
We do have an architect who's done significant work with NASA on interior design, and there is a good legacy of that in certain parts of NASA. To look at that, it may not have been 100% well executed on the station, but it doesn't escape people looking at habitats off Earth that you need to realize you're going to be in something the size of a school bus for a while, and that can get pretty cooped up pretty quickly.
And just from the, go ahead. Just from the Virgin perspective, brand is a big deal for us. Not only are we representing Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit, but we are under the Virgin brand, which it prides itself in its marketing and its design. So for our interiors team, we really do have top-notch, very skilled designers for our interiors. And I don't know about you, but Spaceship Two is like one of the prettiest spacecrafts I've ever seen. And that, that wasn't by accident. We really did place a priority on how our products look as well as how they're going to perform, because we do want to project an image of something that people do want to be a part of.
Because one of those slides compared the early ones to the later. And the later ones were rounded at the top, they were white, they were blue. I almost hate to use the term, but they look less militaristic and more welcoming. Come on board, you're going to enjoy this, it's going to be a benefit.
Social engineering.
I'd like to add to that. So at Aevum, you're hitting it right on. We focused an incredible amount of energy into design. And I'm going to kind of go back to a few questions like this future engineer asked. I think everything that everybody's doing here is extremely difficult. And just being on that side, it's like my first panel really. I don't think that gets expressed enough. Engineering is really hard, but like the technical stuff you can figure out, but it's like the mental challenges. And so when you look at something that you design and it's beautiful, like there's an attachment, and there's that extra little bit to go like that last mile. And so I think like humanities, the human factors of all these things are really important. Like even going back to operating in commercial space stations, you can't take the humanities out of technology because technology is a tool and it's an extension of people and their ability. So you can't just like separate out one from the other. So I think it's always going to be present.
So on the flight out yesterday, I watched 2001 Space Odyssey. It was worn incredibly well. It's only old-fashioned in one way. Women are always oppositions, with the exception of one person. So how do you see gender parity evolving in your field? Has it become an issue? Are you doing anything to equalize or include women into positions in companies? How do you see things evolving?
So from Virgin's side, we like to put our engineers out there talking to other women in engineering or in technical fields. So I think seeing somebody that looks like you, that you want to embody, kind of really does do a lot for you to get into that field. So we really encourage our engineers to go out and talk to the community, really talk about what's involved in engineering or other fields that they would like to be in that could relate to space. So I think really getting out there and communicating with other women goes, the extra mile, because it is, especially for me, I did look up to Indian astronauts growing up, because when you're younger, you really do want to see someone that looks like you doing something that you want to do. It just makes you want to do it more, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and I would note for those on the webcast that can't see the room, white men are the minority in this room. That's not typical for a space meeting, right? Which is really, really interesting. And I think that the industry demographics overall are changing. And we're also moving away from questions just of gender to questions more broadly of inclusion. And how do you make these companies places where everyone can bring their full selves to the table and feel welcome and really spend their time focused on the things that matter most? So I know at Blue Origin, that's something that we spend a lot of our time discussing and talking about.
Right, and I think that's a great point, that it's not just a gender question, that there's so many different definitions of inclusion and diversity, including background and geographically, and so much beyond some of the traditional definitions. Going back to the disability question, that's very much part of it also. And I do think that the field is changing, and all of our companies are very much working to make sure that there is inclusion and opportunities for I will say, everybody.
So who was the next one? Sydney.
So my question is about risk for Marka, Jay, and Simon. And as you try to scale your startups, if you could highlight one particular challenge that you're facing and what kind of support can you give for?
You want to start? I'll start then. Challenges keep on changing, obviously. So when you scale from the 8 individuals, 10 individual core to the 50 individuals to the 150, or to 2 customers to 50 customers geographically. So there is not one challenge, unfortunately, or fortunately. I cherish those. So you have to keep on adapting. For us, we are at a point where the main challenge is to find additional financing, so to keep on sustaining the huge backlog and pipeline that we have, which is a good problem to have. I'm absolutely not complaining about that. And so finding more people, finding more space, finding more money so that you can cover the operating expenses of that, which is also strange for us because we have almost never done it before up until last year. So it's been a good challenge to take over and to execute. But this connects to the real thing for me, which is we do not want to compromise on what we're doing. We don't want to compromise on the quality and the type of relationship we have with our customers and the partnership that we have created that allows us to grow through the years. How to find that balance is the real challenge. More than finding the resources per se, is to maintain that and finding people that listen to you, and then you can have the relationship and coach you through that is the most important thing right now.
I'd say I have a couple, some of those sentiments echo with me on the finance side of things, at least at first, before we raised money. When you've got essentially an idea on a piece of paper, or maybe a prototype, and you need to go from what some people have referred to as like a lab experiment to spaceflight hardware. That's a huge leap. And so getting the financing, sitting in, no customers are necessarily buying that from you before it's done, so you've got to then find money from the government or from an investor or some combination of pretty much those two things, unless you're independently wealthy. And so we've sought out both sources, but it's just tough because as soon as you get over the funding hurdle, the next hurdle is, okay, now go do what you said you're going to do. And you're like, oh, crap, I got to actually, okay. All right, I can do this. I told you I needed $1 million in like a year, and now, oh, you gave me the $1 million. So actually executing effectively is just something that you think you've got your plan in place, and then things crop up that you don't expect, like the landlord didn't give us anywhere to throw out the trash when we moved in, so we had to like deal with all that ourselves for a while until we got a trash service in place, and just all these little things that you're not expecting. The other thing is timing for us. So we need to get our hardware to space, and our launch has been just continuously delayed. We've booked it, and we've paid for it. We're just like, the satellite's ready. We're just waiting for that candle to get lit, and so that is a gating point for a lot of customers, and you've got kind of the choice of either just dancing around while you're waiting or trying to do something else useful. And obviously you want to do something useful, so spending that time wisely while realizing that you've got to keep an eye on the bank account is a tough line to toe.
I'll try to keep my answer short because I think it's pretty, I agree with both of my fellow panelists, but I think there's one thing that really stands out at the top, and that's for Aevum, it's like navigating through the noise. There's a lot of public perception and what other people understand as the truth, and it just isn't. For instance, the average age of Apollo, the rocket that went to the moon, was 27. Sonny Maria, the project manager for F1, the most badass engine ever, he was like 25 when he got pulled into that by von Braun. And so when you really think about that, and you kind of look at, like, when I go to a meeting and people are like, dude, you're 27, and they're like, where's your gray beard, and executives, and it's like, that's just not true. The people that really made history are young, because you have the energy. That doesn't mean that there's no, you have to learn from people that paved the way. And I think that's like a mentor-mentee relationship, which is what existed during Apollo and beyond. The public just doesn't get access to that. And so I think that's the challenge. I think the challenge is just kind of overcoming what everybody else understands as the truth, and then like having the tenacity to push through what is true. Like our animation, I fought that for like a whole year. Like I did not want to do that because we had this entire mission simulation built up with 6 DOF models, and we did CFD like for a whole year and a half, generated all these crazy models, and we did this mission. It was like successful, and we're just like cheering, and the investors would come in. They're like, dude, this looks like crap. And it's just like, well, it's engineering. It's like real numbers. This is real data. This is not like Hollywood magic. And they like that. So that took a month. The other stuff took years. And so, but that's a real challenge that I don't think it's discussed, because that's, the investors make their bets on emotion, which is good. They need to believe in you. But I think with rockets, that's what's really hard, because what we're doing is super, super hard. And it's really, really difficult to communicate that sometimes. Yeah.
So Mark will push us to finish. So can we do the following? We have 3 remaining questions. Can you just pose the questions after each other? 4 remaining. Can you just ask the questions, and then the panel can think about them and answer them as you wish. So can you please?
I was wondering, what would you say is the biggest wall that private space companies have to break through to get to the next level of space exploration?
What do you think is the next level of space exploration?
Starting to colonize different planets.
Now I can think of an answer.
Actually, following up to the previous question, like the amount of new companies in space industry every year is small. And like we see much more companies doing something in blockchain, finding Instagram images, and getting internet. What should happen in order to accelerate this growth in not just 2x, but 10x context?
Okay, one more question.
Yeah, then for like, I guess to echo back to the STEM stuff, I think the Secure World Foundation and like the Small Sat Virtual Institute have these CubeSat 101 handbooks that are good for STEM education. So I'd encourage you guys to check that out. And then knowledge repository, I think, is critical for the industry. So if you guys could address how you guys think there should be some sharing, coalescence of how to achieve the same goal, that would be interesting.
Okay, so, the last one.
I have not a question, I have a really quick plug, especially directed towards Jay. NASA and the Museum of Natural History have a thing called Open Space. It's a mission planning tool. You can use NASA Spice kernels to actually put real world digital universe data to do mission planning. It's openspaceproject.com.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I'll answer that first question, and then you guys can do whatever. So you open up a textbook in class or on your computer, whatever you guys use today, and there's probably a paragraph on the beginning of some major event in history, right? Like the beginning of a war, or somebody discovering a new drug that can eradicate polio, things like that. So those events that are this long in a book are in reality something that took place, maybe built on tens or hundreds of years of research leading up to that, math leading up to that, science leading up to that, and it can't all be condensed. So when you ask what's the wall that we have to get over, I would argue that like we're all collectively getting over the wall right now, and maybe in 50 years, hopefully we'll just become a couple of lines there as the people that opened up space. But I think it is happening by cheaper launch vehicles, but miniaturized electronics, and you're living it now. So just take a lot of notes and make sure we get our due credit when that day comes.
I think the answer to all that is very much the same. It is young people who are focused on space. What's the hurdle? Having people who will be, the next person who runs Nanoracks, or who runs Blue, or something like that, and having a feel for what it means to be in space and what the opportunities are there. When I grew up, if you asked them, it was the Jetsons and Star Trek, and it was somewhat of a either crazy or militaristic type view of space, and it needs to be much more discovering that colloids in space can produce new materials that enhance the function of a pancreas or something like that.
So you mean we need Wild West?
Life vests?
Wild West.
Wild West.
Wild West, yeah, less Wild West, more University of Laramie or something like that.
Okay, so I think we are in the trouble I didn't count on. We have so many questions and so little time. Thank you very much for your wonderful panel. I think this experiment will stay. Thank you very much.